Well, when do you ever hear Jesus telling us to hate? Nowhere else in the Bible. And I should mention something, it's a clue to what we're going to study today. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Think about that. The opposite of love is indifference. If you do not love people who are starving, you may be indifferent. Now, what a strange gospel this is that we just read, with Jesus, our ever-loving Jesus, seeming to tell us to hate our parents and our families. There sure is enough hate-filled talk these days everywhere. Talk of violence, examples of hatred every night in the news. And we especially hate that word in the New Testament. But as often the case, it's not always the way it seems to be. The words in the Bible sometimes mean something different. And we're going to get back to that a little bit later in my message. But what I want to do today is start with what Jeremiah told us about the potter's house. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever tried to throw a pot, on a wheel. It's called throwing a pot. For many of you, the knowledge of pottery may begin and end with that steamy scene in The Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. And I have to tell you, though, I was an art major in a Catholic women's college, and I had to learn how to throw pots, and it never, ever was that interesting at all. I will note that the main thing that we learn when we are potters is that making a mistake or not liking whatever it is that we've thrown, it's not the end of the world. In fact, we're expected to make and remake the clay many, many times. Raw clay by itself has a lot of flaws, air holes, and voids that need to be filled in before you can use it. So there's only one fatal flaw in pot making, and it happens when we don't spend enough time before we start kneading and working with our weight, with the force of our body to drive out the air, the voids, etc. We take the clay and we do something called wedging on a wire. We take the clay and we slice it in two and look to see, do we get all the air out? And there's a reason that we do this. If we as the creators of a pot ignore an empty spot in the clay and place it along with a whole bunch of other pots into a kiln, an oven, to fire it, the hot air expands, and very often it will explode. And when it explodes, it will not only be in shards all over the inside of the kiln, it'll probably take the other pots with it. So, with this image in mind, there's a lesson for us people in it. Especially this month turns out to be National Recovery Month. We especially reach out to all who have been or are addicted, who have mental health problems or suicidal thoughts, and who need the guidance of a higher power. We are called to the potter's house. This is the potter's house. We just encountered Jeremiah, where Donna's nice reading this morning, who heard the voice of God calling him and saying, "Come on down to the potter's house, and there I will tell you, you will hear my words." And he says, so I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel. The vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel, until it seemed good to him. The word of the Lord came to me, "Can I not do with you, O house of Israel, just as this potter has done? Just like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. At one moment I may declare concerning a nation or kingdom that I will pluck up and break down and destroy it. But if that nation, concerning which I have spoken, turns from its evil, I will change my mind about the disaster that I had intended to bring upon it. So just as we face a society filled with chaos and hatred today, Jeremiah was writing for the people, individually and as a culture, that had lost its way. God is the potter, the creator of who we are, according to the plan and vision that he has for us and for our futures. So, as Steve Godfrey is an interesting character. He's a software analyst, but he's also a minister. There's a combination for you. And he wrote this, he studied this passage, and he wrote this about the whole idea of what Jesus meant. He says, is identity something we have to choose for ourselves? Jeremiah 18 provides a very different answer. Our identity is shaped by God, not only individuals, but as nations. As clay, rather than trying to shape ourselves, the Bible invites us to pursue a relationship with our potter, a relationship with our potter. The hard truth is God is going to shape us whether we like it or not. The good news is that God offers us a chance to turn back to him before he reshapes us. Jesus did not come to condemn anyone. He came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So I should mention that in Jesus' day, going to the potter's house was a very common event, mainly because all the commonplace pots that were being made, they weren't beautiful. They were just regular, everyday use, kind of like the Melmac of their day. And so going to the potter's house was kind of like going to Target to get a replacement for whatever you had. But inside the potter's house, God also takes mistakes and he pounds them into a fine clay, the things he had worked and didn't work. He starts over. And he's capable of starting from dust when nations become evil and people forget their creator. God can restore us. God can restore us. God will indeed abandon failing projects and turn them into new things. That brings us to the perplexing words of today's gospel. Is Jesus really telling us, if we are to become his disciples, to learn to hate our parents and our family? We should note that the passage right before this one, there are two stories right before this one, has Jesus in the home of a Pharisee. And he's really kind of intrigued by Jesus. And he kind of likes what Jesus is saying. And he wants to kind of take it up almost like a hobby, where he practices it sometimes, and he practices it not at all. But what Jesus is telling us in these lines is that our first obligation in this life is to choose God. Choose God. To choose to do as God does. This is not a hobby. And Jesus guarantees that following him will cost us dearly, even among the members of our own family. Amy Jill Levine is one of my favorites. She's a professor up at Hartford, is a Rhodes Scholar, and an interesting professor she is. As she says, she's a self-described Yankee Jewish feminist who teaches in a predominantly Protestant divinity school in the buckle of the Bible Belt, and who grew up predominantly in a Catholic neighborhood in Massachusetts. She is fascinated, though, by Jesus, even though she's an Orthodox Jew, and she writes a great deal about Jesus. So she answers this question about hate in Jesus' words this way. To understand Jesus' statement, we need to understand how the term hate functions. The term has numerous connotations. Hating broccoli is not quite the same thing as hating a sports rival. And hating the rival is not the same thing as the hate some people have for others of different political parties, ethnic or religious national groups. Hate comes in degrees. In the Gospel of Luke, the term translated hate, Greek for misio, is used 6 other times, and this is the only one where it's applied to Jesus' disciples being asked to hate others. So if we see how it's used elsewhere, we get a better sense of what it means in our verse. In all the uses except for our perplexing verse, hate is something directed to Jesus and to the disciples, or others who are in covenant with Jesus. Only in Luke 14 are Jesus' disciples who are the ones who do the hating. Jesus is telling them and us that it is we who will be hated for sticking to the tenets of living like Christ. When we feed the hungry, accept the refugee, care for people who are not like us in terms of who they love or who they identify as being, when we stick up for these principles, our own families can reject us. And, just ask the next time you get together for Thanksgiving, just ask your drunk uncle when he starts picking on you because you believe in helping people. Discipleship is costly. Dr. Levine adds, in Luke's version of the Beatitudes, Jesus tells his followers, "Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man." On account of the Son of Man. And Luke repeats the point where Jesus warns his followers, you will be betrayed, even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. They did in those days. You will be hated by all because of my name. You see, so what we're saying here is that following Jesus is serious business. It's not for chickens. It's hard work, and it's dangerous work. But what it means is sometimes if we can't invest ourselves entirely, it means deciding each day when we get up if we will be his disciples this day. That our discipleship is a work in progress. We all know in the turbulent days ahead, we can feel the turbulent days ahead coming, that we will be asked, you don't really believe in all that Jesus stuff, even for today, do you? What will be your answer? What will be your answer? What kind of clay are you made out of? Amen. For this week, I wish you a sense of peace. I wish for you to have an internal sense of peace when you encounter hatred in other people, whether it's directed at you or directed at people you know that no one deserves hatred. And I hope you have the courage to step up and to say, we love you. Because love is the only thing that can counteract mindless hatred. May God bless and keep you all this week. May God let God's face shine upon you and show you the path, now and always. Amen.